Yeah, thank you indeed for that package. And to discuss the topic, Niger Coup, 16 days after. Let me first of all welcome to our studio here in Abuja, Ambassador Usman Sariki, former Nigeria's permanent representative to the United Nations. We're glad to have you here this morning, sir.
Thank you very much. Please.
Also with us is a regular on this beat, Dr. Kabir Adamu, Security Risk Management Expert. We're glad to have you this morning.
The pleasure is mine. Good morning.
All right.
All right. And Kirian, just to add that Ambassador Usman Sarki was with us on Monday following the expiration of the 7-day deadline given by the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government to the military junta in Niamey. So we had a conversation, and we are glad that he's back with us here in the studios. Of course, we also take advantage of his recent engagement as directing staff at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Coup, near Jos. We're also being joined for today's conversation by Usman Abdullahi Shehu, is the NTA correspondent who is joining us from Birni Kebbi. That's in Kebbi State, one of Nigeria's border states with Niger Republic. Usman, we're glad to have you on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Join us.
All right, so let's begin with you. Kebbi, as I indicated, is one of the border states with Niger Republic. What is it from a reporter's eyes that you have seen in the 2 weeks or so since the change of government, unconstitutional change of government in Niamey? Unconstitutional.
Speaking, Kebbi State has 3 local governments that are sharing border with Niger Republic. And then these local government are Arewa, Bagudo, and Dendi local government area, respectively. And from these 3 local government, there are 4 control posts. That is the official point of exit and entry. But right before the presidential directives, the other 3 control posts have already been closed. That means they are not active. That is that of Dole Kaina and the Kangiwa and other one at Bagudu local government. Leaving the Kamba border, the only one bustling with socio-economic activities. And then with the since the presidential directives, even that Kamba border is now shut down. It has been closed with 0 activities on ground. And then leaving only the officials of the Nigerian Immigration Service and the Nigerian Customs Service mounting 24 hours patrol and monitoring team to ensure compliance of the border closure. Let me make a point here. The Kamba border in particular is a route where most of goods and services from this part of the country usually flow through Niger, Ghana, and other West African countries. And then the Kamba itself has a weekly local, or rather an international agricultural produce market there, where people from the neighboring countries usually converge and make business transaction and other activities. But with the closure of this border now, especially that of Kamba, the market itself is experiencing a serious drop in patronage, because most of the people who patronize that market comes from the neighboring country. For the market itself is the major item or product that is being sold or there is rice in particular. And then here in Birni Kebbi, which is about roughly 100 kilometers away from Kamba, the effect of that action is still, reflecting. There are, before the action, they sell a bag of foreign rice costs about 33 to 34,000, but now it costs about 39 to 40,000, which also affect the price of even the locally processed rice, which before this event, a major is cost about 800 to 850 naira, but now it is about 1,300 naira, which indicates that the effect of the action of border closure is still, effective in the state.
Usman, let me stay with you and ask you this, because from all indications, Nigerians and Nigerians, in that border area have been having business interactions, as you explained, as well as intermarriages and other social activities and what have you. And with the closure of this border, as you rightly said, interactions and transactions have been adversely affected. It's even affecting the prices of food items, which is, of course, the primary items sold in markets in those areas. Now, what are the feeling of the people concerned, the communities, the border communities affected? How are they coping? How are they feeling? What are you hearing from them?
They are seriously reacting to that action in particular. Some of them, like a day before yesterday, I was with somebody who has his grandparent living in Niger. He was complaining that now he wants to cross to the border to go and meet his family, but he couldn't because of the serious measures taken. That even those trying to cross by foot are being stopped. Back to you, studio.
So, thank you very much for the responses to our initial questions. We'll come back to you in the course of the conversation. Now, back to the studios. I want to start with two guests. First, Dr. Kabir Adamu. It looks like in the air there is some warmongering. And against the warmongering, there is also in the air a caution against resort to the use of force to dislodge the junta in Niamey. How are you reading the situation? How did this come about in the first instance?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. There was a coup on July 26th, and that coup clearly contravened several things, starting from the Nigerian constitution into instruments and protocols for which that country is a member, ECOWAS, AU, the UN. Now, as a result of the current diplomatic disposition, ECOWAS was put forward as the major organ to intercede in that development. ECOWAS met on the 30th of July and came out with a communique. The communique listed several stiff consequences for that action. Some of them were economic sanctions, and then they also included the possibility of military intervention. Now, sadly, in my opinion, a lot of the conversation has tilted towards the military intervention component and not necessarily the reasons why ECOWAS even reacted. And that brings me to perhaps the failure to use strategic communication by both the chair of ECOWAS, which is Nigeria, and then ECOWAS itself. It appears to me that the junta in Niger have been more successful in putting out their narrative and galvanizing support for their action. And so you see young Nigerians coming out on the street, marching in protest in support of the military intervention. And it appears also to me that the Nigerian junta has taken advantage of the very strong French resentment, anti-French resentment that exists in Niger in mobilizing support for themselves. So the current narrative has put aside the very act that they did, and sadly is looking at this possibility of military intervention. Now, having said that, the other things we're hearing is that the economic sanctions are actually taking a bite on Niger. And so what ECOWAS had intended to achieve is actually being achieved. And we're hoping that when they sit down today, what they will do is to use the institutional mechanism within ECOWAS to review progress on all the components of the sanctions, see where they are, where they need to adjust, make those necessary adjustments. But it's very likely that, based on what we are hearing as non-official, sources, that they would be happy with the progress that the economic sanctions are making at the moment. Of course, I talked about this element of strategic communication that seemed to have tilted the conversation towards an unintended consequence. That's this issue of military intervention. It shouldn't be taken off the table for the simple reason that the wave of military adventurism, as it were, in the West African sub-region is something that should worry every person within that sub-region, and in fact in the world.
Okay, well said. There are permutations to this conversation, and of course there are a lot of interest in the Nigerian Republic. A lot of big nations, they have their foot on Niger. So some persons have said that, look, it will not be really easy to venture into military action, and there are other considerations, and that's why I'm bringing in Ambassador Usman Saraki, for instance. There are protocols for international relations between one nation and the other, and we also have regional relationships in terms of ECOWAS and AU and other regions, who have come together for partnership and collaboration, developmental collaboration. And in this circumstance of the coup that we have just seen happen, and the big stick, that ECOWAS tried to wield at the first instance, some have also considered that perhaps it was hasty to get into, to begin to threaten as an initial response to what happened, and so on. And today, we now know that other countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, who are also under military regime, have of course shown interest. In fact, they visited the junta, physically, to assure him that they're going to give support, to him militarily and otherwise. Now you're a diplomat of high repute. What would have been the initial response of ECOWAS at the first instance when the coup broke out?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to fellow Nigerians. I think, the initial response of ECOWAS, as contained in its communique of 30th August, I think, is quite appropriate under the circumstances. ECOWAS, like you rightly pointed out, diplomacy and interstate relationships are based on codified laws, instruments, and conventions from which you cannot willfully derogate. That you cannot just wake up one day to contravene. Otherwise, there would be anarchy, chaos, and instability everywhere. The principal articles of the United Nations Charter are actually designed to maintain international peace and security. The maintenance of peace and security is central and critical to international law and to interstate relationships. Where this balance is broken or disturbed, it is the duty of states to act in order to prevent the slide down into chaos. ECOWAS is mandated by its very constitution, when it was established, as an economic organization. But 2 or 3 years later, in the Lagos Treaty, the idea of peace and security and stability was also brought into its mandate. So the actions of ECOWAS leaders assembled in Abuja on the 30th were in conformity, in consonance, and appropriately anchored on the provisions of the relevant acts and decisions and protocols of ECOWAS. Having said so, we should be very clear about the situation in Niger. As I said before, it is not about Nigeria. It is not about ECOWAS. It is not about President Tinubu. It is not about the Nigerian government. It is about an unlawful, illegal, unconstitutional takeover of power by a clique of military officers in Niger that contravened their own constitution. I want Nigerians to go and read the 2010 Constitution of Niger that was amended in 2017. The provisions are very clear that it is a democratic country, that changes of government can only take place through the will of the people in ballot, the exercise of ballot. Military intervention has been proscribed and rendered illegal by the Constitution. And like Dr. Kabiru said, international law also abhors the use of violence to change government. That is the question. There is nothing beyond that. Any other thing beyond that, any other consideration outside this context are suppositions, conjectures, and extrapolations. They have no place whatsoever in the consideration that governments should do. So it's very important for us to distinguish between the actions of ECOWAS member states that were in reaction to what the junta or the junta in Niger did. So we need to be very clear, dispassionate on that. Diplomacy is based on facts.
So let me just add something to you so you can just round off. What happened in Niger, of course, is a coup. It's been established, but there was no violence, no gunshots had in that arrangement. Then what happened in Zimbabwe some time ago when Robert Mugabe was stylishly, removed out of power by the military without announcing it as a coup, but they successfully ensured that his wife does not take over the mantle of leadership in Zimbabwe by doing what they did. The world did not call it a coup. And so what is the difference between this kind of change of government in the actual sense of it?
Well, we are now speaking in the context of ECOWAS and the provisions of ECOWAS, particularly the supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance. What the provisions of that protocol apply only to ECOWAS members. So we are discussing the issue in relation to an ECOWAS member state in whose politics the principles and precepts of that protocol have been vitiated by the military. So it is not our duty to create linkages for now, Africa, especially after effect. Now there is a problem here that you are now rendering your own government and the ECOWAS member states to take a position that beyond this limit, we will not tolerate such interventions. People are saying military coup took place in Mali, in Guinea, and in Burkina Faso, and ECOWAS didn't act. That is quite true. It didn't act decisively. Now the leaders are saying that enough is enough. You cannot continue deliberately obliterating established standards and norms of behavior in politics and government and get away with it simply because of lack of will on the part of ECOWAS to act. So the actions taken by our leaders, I repeat, our leaders, on the 30th of August are in conformity with the provisions and standards of regional and international law. That is the bottom line.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Usman Sarki. Well, again, we'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's go over to our Meduguri Network Center, where we've been joined by Professor Shetima Khalifa Dikwa. Professor Dikwa is a professor of social linguistics English, French, and Arabic at the University of Maiduguri. Of course, is an analyst of international relations and politics, and dean of the Kanem Borno Diaspora. Kanem Borno Diaspora, which is a resuscitation of May Idris Aloma of Kanem Borno Empire. Professor Dikwa, we're glad to have you on Good Morning Nigeria today. Tell us, what is the impact, if you may, of what is happening in Niger Republic? I mean, when we had our first conversation on the situation there, it was said that, look, Niger had always been susceptible to this kind of unconstitutional change of government, but in recent years it appeared to have stabilized. And this happened, and everyone is, as it were, literally up in arms. What is the difference this time?
Good morning, everyone. Kingsley Akirian, my co-panelist, my brother, Ambassador Usman Saliki, and others. Good morning to all Nigerians. After a long time, let me say that I wouldn't disagree too much with the views of Ambassador Usman Saliki as a diplomat, but please allow me to go academic a little bit so that we remove. Sometimes diplomats put their own words very beautifully, more than the beauty itself. So in ECOWAS, like the earlier said, originally was for economic reason. And secondly, until later, 3 years later, it was turned to peace, and therefore some measures of military there, and that ECOWAS, thirdly, ECOWAS is just in Nigeria, because Nigeria pays the bill, and basically Nigeria has been financing it, everything, and it is just deliberate that they gave it quickly to our president to head it, and thirdly, fourthly, right now ECOWAS is sharply divided into two, pro and against the coup. Coup is illegal. It is illegal. And again, there was another illegal coup there prior to the military, which was the one charter, 11-point treaty between the colonial powers and ex-French colonies, which were impossible to live with. And it has been there since independence in 1960, most of them. And the second coup that has already been existing there was the constitutional coup d'etat by some heads of states of ECOWAS that was allowed to happen, for instance, by Guinea's Alpha Condé, which was later on toppled and with another counter coup. The second one was by Côte d'Ivoire. But Côte d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara, a sitting president at that time, Laurent Gbagbo, just insisted that the votes be recounted. And it was another French troops within the country that dislodged a sitting president, for that matter, of Côte d'Ivoire, removed him, humiliated him, and so on, and then handed over to Alassane Ouattara. That Alassane Ouattara had the 2 terms, and then tried a third one. He is now going through the third one, which is a coup, a constitutional coup. What is the big deal about allowing those constitutional coups to remain in the ECOWAS? Military regime is unacceptable because people are now have resorted to using a brain. When you have the brains, you don't need the guns. We are all fighting to silence the guns so that all the guns can be melted together and perhaps make certain other things with the iron and so on. It is not. It is only good for, it only favors those who are making the weapons. and actually with dialogue and so on, military coups could be avoided. Perhaps the ideal change was either by voting directly or by direct protest by civilians taken to the streets asking the government of the day to step down. If that government agrees to step down, fine. Otherwise, they have to wait for the next election. That was the ideal thing to do. But here we are. They said third term, unacceptable. We also had our own third term. Luckily, we defeated it at that time. And that why is it that Nigerians has many community radio stations with a lot of awareness that all of them are out and against the presence of foreign troops led by French. French has always been there, has never done. And French had been accused of spying on the country and countries around Niger. And particularly, I dare say that French government has never been a friend of Nigeria. Right from the first coup of 1967, had never been a friend of Nigeria. And that the Western world has been itching to create a war to transfer what is there in Ukraine to Africa, because to them, to the Western world, the death of Africans, it doesn't matter. It is just about their own resources and the land. Africa has the land, the territory, and the resources that all their industries need. But they don't care about the lives of Africans. This is a basic thing, and all this magic is due to the social media. Today, Africans are talking to Westerners themselves. For instance, citizens of Niger are talking to their counterparts in France as citizens, telling them the activities of their own governments in Niger about the 11-point treaty that says no, Niger has no right to deal with any other country without the consent of France. And France has right over the resources of Niger. France alone trains the military personnel on the security. France has the right to invade Niger at any time militarily. France keeps 85% of the foreign reserve in French treasury, Banque Française, and giving them only 15%. When the 15% is not enough, they go back, cap in hand, to beg to be given more. Their own money, they beg to be given more as a loan, and then they pay with interest. Meanwhile, the foreign reserve they deposited there is in the Paris Stock Exchange.
Professor Dikwa, I want to appreciate all the good points you brought in here. You brought in the economic aspect of it. We're going to return to you, in the course of this conversation, because I want our guests here in the studio to also speak along the same line of the point that you have raised, which is the economy this time around. People's welfare, sustenance of a particular system that may have existed over centuries or over decades. 11-point treaties with France, which constitutionally does not allow Niger to do things on their own. And the junta leader did say in one of his comments, that even when they're fighting terrorists, that they had to take permission from French military before they kill a terrorist. That he couldn't understand that as a soldier, that somebody is killing you and you want to get a person down and you have to take permission from somebody else who is not even a Nigerian to do that. These are things that have been laid down over the years, especially in Francophone countries of West Africa. And what is playing out from what we've seen so far could be reaction by those persons in Niger who felt that, look, we can't allow this to continue. There are other interests in Niger. Russia, for instance, is there. The US is there. These are people who have military bases in that small country of Niger, where you have US, you have French, and you have, it seems the country is somehow back and or shared among some foreign powers who are interested in the resources of that small country, which is about one of the poorest country in the world, and they have a product that is one of the most expensive globally when you talk about uranium and the value chain. At the time. I want to bring you in, the doctor, once more on this line of economy. People have been agitating for a very long time, and this time around they say, look, let's just express our concern. And you can see the support they're galvanizing. It's not necessarily giving approval to coup d'etat, which of course is an aberration when it comes to governance, But then, is it like, okay, if you can't get it the right way, let's get it the wrong way?
Exactly, and I think that's sadly for me the narrative that is out there. And I think we need to bring clarity to the fact that just because you are not happy with the system, why do we have elections after every 4 years? And why do we have political parties? The idea is that the political parties will give options during their campaign on what the way to steer the country. And as a citizen, you can rally behind a particular political party that you believe in the agenda or the ideals that it's putting forward. I don't think it is appropriate to sit and suggest, for instance, that because you're unhappy with the status quo and then you use the gun to take power. No, it's not acceptable. The norm in the world right now is that we're against military intervention. Niger, over the last decade, has shown itself as a country that is making progress in the democratic culture. Are we there? No, we're not there. There are structural, there are institutional challenges that need to be corrected, need to be developed.
5 coups, 1960.
Over 63 years. And my point is, it is not appropriate, it is actually unethical to suggest that using the gun to take power because you are not happy with the status quo is an option. It shouldn't be an option. We should use democratic means. I mean, there is a vibrant political culture. The political party system in Niger. Sometimes I even think more vibrant than the Nigerian political culture. If you are following developments there and you see how vibrant their politicians are in terms of discussing national issues, you know that this is a country that has a future. Anytime there is a military adventurism that truncates that progress, it's taking the country back, yes. And I think this is what we need to, as one, speak against. Not just for them, but even for our own sake. We have made tremendous progress over the last 24 years in our democratic culture. And I think rallying around and supporting the growth of democracy within the sub-region and within the continent should be the message, the narrative. And I'm hoping this is what ECOWAS, when they sit today, would speak as one voice. Yes, Professor has spoken about the divisions.
Constitutional coup d'etat, seeking for third term. These are the causative factors of what we're looking at now. Causative factors. A man will have 2 tenures. After the 2 tenures, he will now politically re-engineer the constitution to favor him and his clout to now sustain himself in governance. And people are dying. People are suffering. There is abject poverty and so on. So in that circumstance, what should someone do? I'm not glorifying whatever action, but there are stark realities of life. You cannot buy bread. You cannot get water. You cannot get this over 60 years of existence. You don't have tap water. The simplest technology in the world. You can't have tap water, but you have good resources that people are enjoying elsewhere. So let's become human about all of this. Yes, laws, regulations, fine and good. But again, implementation. That's where Shetima is concerned about constitutional coup d'etat.
Yeah, but the question is...
Which ECOWAS is not looking into. That's what he's saying.
No. ECOWAS, maybe we're saying ECOWAS needs to do more. But I think it's unfair to say ECOWAS is not looking into. If I'm right, and probably Ambassador would shed more light on it, there's a peer-to-peer mechanism. And there are several other components, protocols, instruments on good governance that ECOWAS has. But are we there yet? Is it a reality that the dividends of democracy, as it were, is not being felt in most African countries? Yes, it's a reality. In fact, in Niger that we're discussing, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. And by the way, Niger is not small. The landmass in Niger is actually bigger than Nigeria. And so from a strategic point of view, we also need to take that into consideration. If these countries that were reeling out pull out, will Niger on its own be able to protect its territory in terms of its territorial integrity? These are critical questions that we need to consider.
All right, Dr. Kabir Adamu, thank you very much. I want to bring in again Ambassador Usman Sarki. Now, from the point of view of diplomatic engagements, the authority of heads of state and government of ECOWAS, they are due to meet later today in Abuja. Now, how do you square the two broad matters that are now, as it were, on the table, not just of public conversation, that will most likely also engage the attention of the authority of heads of state? The dominant issue on constitutional, illegal, and unlawful takeover of power. Hook on to that, the latent issues that are also being dredged up, part of which Professor Dikwa already referenced, part of which we have also been hearing in the sentiments expressed by Nigerians themselves on the streets of Niamey and probably elsewhere in the country, what Dr. Kabir referred to as anti-French sentiments. And then part of the latent issues again that we in Nigeria have equally raised to say, listen, hey, we are brothers and sisters. We have cultural and social ties and economic ties. And so keep the gun silent in the meantime and don't go there, because if you do, we're going to have a number of issues to deal with. So, as I said, on the diplomatic scale, how do you square these issues? A dominant issue to say comply with the ECOWAS protocol, and then the latent issues that are no less relevant coming up 16 days after the coup.
Yes. Thank you. Let me welcome my brother, Professor Khalifa Dikwa, on the program. And in response to your question, I think it's important that we realize that the ECOWAS heads of state and government are pursuing the diplomatic option thoroughly. And I believe in their meeting today, they will review events from their last meeting of 30th August.
30th July.
30th July, I'm sorry, to yesterday. And from their assessment and from the report that they will receive from the Political Peace and Security Commission or Council of ECOWAS, they will now deliberate on the position that has been adopted by the military regime in Niger, their reactions, and see whether they are appropriate to provide the way forward towards negotiated settlement. If it appears to them that all their efforts have actually led to nowhere in terms of obtaining a change of behavior on the part of the regime in Niamey, then they will now look at their earlier communique, their decision of 30th July, and see what other levels of calibration that will be applied in order to bring the situation to a satisfactory end. Let us take 2 points. The beginning, which is the forceful, unlawful, and illegal, unconstitutional change of government by the military in Niger, and the end objective established by ECOWAS, which is the reinstatement of the government of Mohamed Bazoum and his release. So they have to bridge the gap, and diplomacy will be the instrument for bridging the gap. What if diplomacy fails and there is no response commensurate to the demands of ECOWAS on the part of the regime? What do you do? Do you now throw up your hands in the air and give up and say you cannot do anything? That will now affect the entire credibility of the ECOWAS. It will also impact on the capacity of ECOWAS and the African Union to act in situations that vitiate the established order of things in any other country. So if we are looking at this matter, we should look at it dispassionately, look at the facts on the ground and deal with them, no matter how inconvenient these facts are. You have asked about the larger ramifications, the sentiments that are now coming to the surface. I fully agree with my brother, Professor Dikwa, and with Kerian and yourself, and everybody out there that is, number one, insisting on peaceful resolution. Wars do not actually lead to amicable resolution of issues. They leave behind them residues of discontent, destruction, suspicions, anger, and everything. But when you take a course of action that dictates the use of force, it must have been brought about by compelling reasons that are unavoidable. So in diplomacy, all options, as they say, should be on the table. However, reason should dictate that the peaceful option should be exhausted. Have you heard our president saying he's going to attack Niger? I haven't. I haven't read it anywhere. I haven't heard him say that anywhere. Have you heard our government declaring that they are going to use force? I haven't read it anywhere. I haven't heard it. So why are we now imputing upon ourselves that we are a nation up at arms or up in arms against Niger? We are not.
Okay.
Now, I'm sorry, it's important for us to follow the issues. Number one, the discontent against French presence. Nigerians and Africans and Nigerians, Malians, Guineans, they have absolute right to insist on their independence and sovereignty and to be free of foreign domination and influence. They have the right to control their resources. And one of the things that we are going to advise the Nigerian government is to now revisit existing processes and norms in international relations to assert, number one, the political independence and sovereignties of countries as recognized by the UN Charter, as recognized by the African Union Constitutive Act, and many other instruments under international law. Political independence and sovereignty and the reflection of that in the integrity of the governments of countries is a bottom line that must not be transgressed against. The second is the permanent sovereignty of nations over their natural resources. Since 1952, the discussion in the United Nations have been on the issue of permanent sovereignty of peoples and nations over their natural resources. In 1958, the United Nations established the Commission on Permanent Sovereignty over Natural Resources. In 1962, under Resolution 1803, I think, the United Nations codified as part of customary international law permanent sovereignty of nations over their natural resources. That resolution was actually put into practice in the decree number 1 of the United Nations Council on Namibia, asserting the right of the Namibian people over their natural resources and the judicious, equitable use of their natural resources for their development. This impasse in Niger now should give us the opportunity, especially Nigeria, to lead a continental discussion on non-alignment principle.
Thank you, sir.
On permanent sovereignty over resources and on political independence, real independence of African nations. So the ramifications are now that we should assert ourselves, our dignity, our sovereignty, and control over our natural resources, so which should apply to Nigeria also. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for raising that resolutions of the UN. You know, what happens in Africa is whatever resolutions, are agreed at the UN level, when it comes to cascading these resolutions down, to Africa and other, we don't get it right. That is the problem that we have faced over the years since independence. Exactly, and the independent nations like Nigeria and the rest of them are still relying to some degrees on these colonial masters to get things done, even in the production of the resources we're talking about. In Nigeria, we still have foreign multinationals in the oil and gas and what have you. Right, but in the case of Niger and other Francophone African countries that are complaining, because what happened in Niger opened up a lot of things, you know. Burkina Faso came up, Mali came up to say, look, yes, they chased away France from Mali, and they got to Niger, you know, and so on. And the military chaps, who of course have condemned their act, are also saying that in those countries you have, you know, puppet presidents who listen to these foreign powers, and in that case what they're doing in terms of governance is not reflecting, the citizens are not feeling the impact of governance, right, you know, and that is part of the problem. But you know, if you don't address causative factors, you may never get to an issue. You can never nip any issue in the bud or even, you know, react properly. What happened in terms of what ECOWAS did, said they never say we're going to war. They were threatened that they would come by force. It was obvious, you know. So that was why they even decided not to accept to even see the joint delegation, UN, US, Nigeria, and so on. So it's kind of they were angered. They are not right. You know, I mean, we have all agreed to that. But again, diplomacy. You know, they say, you know, if you have to go to equity, go with clean hands, right? So let's bring in Professor Adekwa once more. Apart from the academic angle that you brought in to re-educate us on the historical backgrounding as to what is happening in Francophone countries. Now, what do you think that the ECOWAS special session today should be addressing, considering what has played out since the coup that took place in Niger? What should be those thematic areas, you know, that they should address to see to come about the next step to take with respect to Niger coup?
Somehow, I also accuse the media, not NTA, that has graduated a lot from by asking tough questions, a serious one from earlier than 2007, and NTA, I'm very proud of it, like my brother, Ambassador Usman Serkiri, one of the finest diplomats, put it succinctly. Today I say that the media said deliberately laid emphasis on the military option rather than putting diplomacy, and secondly, rather than saying this is the position of ECOWAS, not the position of Nigeria. Deliberately the media made that noise. And nobody harasses, nobody intimidates the military because they are trained to be loyal to their own country. So it irritates them when somebody threatens them anywhere. And know that Nigeria's military is one of the three best in the continent, and brought accolades to the continent, to the country at all time. And I also get irritated when people find it convenient to say terrible things about our armed forces and so on. This is an area for Dr. Kabiru Adamu with his statistics, all the time accurate statistics, and he's always out there to serve selflessly for Nigeria to enlighten our people. And that the approach is that, sorry, that was the position of the ECOWAS, and the military option ought to have been the last, or not with less emphasis, and therefore the revision of what they are going through today, in the absence of some members of the ECOWAS, and some of them present may not vote in favor of anything military. And we should also note that prior to the coming to becoming Niger and Nigeria. Those two entities have been one in one country. Under Kanem Bordeaux, the oldest empire in the sub-region, followed by Sokoto after 1200 years. And Nigeria and Niger share a border of 1,500 kilometers. The same cultures, the same language, as Kingsley succinctly put it. And therefore, anything confrontational, anything military irritates the people from both sides. And to them, ECOWAS had played the game of the country, the colonial country, that sees Nigeria as the existential threat to leading, because it leads anything peaceful in Nigeria, meaning that Nigeria will lead other countries to get free, because in Nigeria the military doesn't go into all these misadventures, and that with Nigeria there is a freedom of expression. In Niger, opposition people are locked simply because they find it convenient to criticize the colonial powers that keeps the military in place. For instance, they said even the bases, America alone has 2 bases in Niger alone, one for drones and the other one for troops. French has been permanent there. The same thing with Senegal, which may also go the same way, because the opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko, is jailed with politically motivated excuses and so on. And therefore, to me, the main question is that let us have this dialogue, because Nigeria cannot lead ECOWAS. If it were just to lead ECOWAS into fighting the neighboring country directly, a brotherly country, just like a continuation of northern Nigeria, Niger, and some people have their farms from the other side, intermarried from the other side, the same language, the same everything, until 1884-85, at the Berlin Conference, the colonial powers sat together in order to share the continent like a cake. Without
Professor Dikwa, thank you so much. You're always taking us to historical background, which is very, very impressive. Right. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, we will continue with the conversation, and of course, all the points you raised, other guests will also, talk about them. So stay with us. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on NTA Network Service. We'll be right back.
Fellow Nigerians, this period may be hard on us, and there is no doubt that it's tough on us. But I urge you all to look beyond the present temporary pains and aim at the larger picture. All our good and helpful plans are in the works. More importantly, I know that they will work.
Hey, welcome to the StarTimes 35th anniversary celebration. To say thank you to every StarTimes family for being an integral part of our journey, StarTimes has decided to give you a price slash on decoders. Yes, we are slashing the price of our antenna decoder from 8,900 naira to 7,500 naira, and the dish decoder from 13,300 naira to 9,900 naira. But that's not all. Existing subscribers can recharge for 2 months on their current bouquet and get upgraded to the next higher bouquet. And if you recharge on the classic or super bouquet, you will receive a fantastic reward of extra 15 days of free viewing. You can enjoy our top local and international content. So, what are you waiting for? Quickly, visit any StarTimes outlet around you to recharge or buy your decoder between June 12th to August 31st to enjoy this fabulous offer. Wow! Yay! Let the celebration begin! StarTimes, entertain your family.
Nigeria means unity.
Nigeria means freedom to me.
Nigeria means greatness to me.
Nigeria is indivisible. There is nothing you can do. We all have to savage it together and learn to love each other. We are indivisible.
as a mother and a leader, I will always preach for peace and unity in this country, because that is the only thing that will give us progress.
Though tribes and tongues may differ, in brotherhood we stand. And it is the woman that does that.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's rejoin our correspondent, Usman Shehu, who is with us from Berini, Kebbi. That's the capital of Kebbi State, one of Nigeria's border states with Niger Republic. Usman, we've kept you quiet for a while. I want to come back to you now. One, what sentiments are you hearing from the border areas about what's going on in Niger Republic? Is it one of indifference to say, oh no, these politicians and these military guys, they are disturbing us, or they are seeking a quick resolution of the issue? That's one. Second point, I've seen some footage, this time from Katsina, which also is one of Nigeria's border states with Niger Republic. And you have trucks filled with goods that are all lined up somewhere around Jibia, heading out to Niger Republic, but on account of the border closure, those trucks are now stranded. Are we having similar scenes around the 3 or 4 local government areas that are the border locations with Niger Republic? So, 2 questions. The first one is, do you have a freeze, for instance, on logistics to and from Niger Republic? And secondly, what are the ordinary folks saying about what is happening in Niger Republic, being the cause of what you told us earlier?
Let me start with the second question. About logistic and trucks. Unfortunately, same thing happened here in Kebbi State at Kamba border, exactly, because that's the only functional border before the presidential directives. There are several trucks there, especially those loaded with some of the agricultural product and other goods that are trying to, pass through there to other African states, especially the onion sellers. In most of the time, like day before yesterday, if I could recall, somebody told me that there were several distant trucks loaded with onions, that the onions have already started to spoil. Then let me come back to the first question. With regards to that question, the communities, one will never know the bond that exists between Nigeria and Niger until he found himself within such border communities. They were, seriously, they couldn't believe it, in fact. They were saying, how did this come to happen? Why will Nigeria try to, take military action against their own brothers? But the most important thing is that they want this issue to quickly resolve, and urging the ECOWAS to use more diplomatic processes rather than military action against their country.
Kira, Usman, I'm sure you heard Ambassador Sarki earlier. This is part of what is being put out there in terms of the appropriate messaging. Nigeria, and of course President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Nigeria currently heads the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government. And the decision arising from the communique at the end of their meeting on the 30th of July wasn't a Nigerian decision. It was a decision of ECOWAS. So it is not Nigeria that is going, assuming that becomes the last resort, it is not Nigeria that is going to war with Niger Republic. But how come we continue to hear this narrative, that Nigeria wants to declare war on Niger Republic? What's going on? Is it what are you hearing from even the local media, let's say broadcast media, radio and television? Is there a tweaking of the message that Nigeria wants to declare war or ECOWAS wants to declare war? Is anyone talking also about the tablet of sanctions that have been imposed on the military junta?
Frankly speaking, the media here, the local media, are all, telling the story how it should be or as it is, which means it is the decision of the ECOWAS. But when you move to the local communities there, most of them are uneducated. And with our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the head of the ECOWAS, so they usually simply take it or assume it to be as if Nigeria is forcing the ECOWAS to take military action against their country.
Okay, thank you so much, Osman. We were just, deliberating on what could have led, to the locals, thinking that it was Nigeria and not ECOWAS. You have already made it clear that it's those ones who actually are not literate enough to understand the concept of ECOWAS are saying so. But even in some quarters, those who understand are also saying so, believing that, if Nigeria is leading, it is calling the shots, because ECOWAS, Nigeria is ECOWAS, so to speak, in terms of even funding of that very, community. All right, thank you. We may return to you if we have time to do that. Meanwhile, let's come back here to the studio where we still have Dr. Kabir Adamu, who is the person to take us on. You have listened to Professor Dekwa, and the angle has always, gone to, and you, of course, as he also, appreciated that you have the implicit analysis of of Africa's security system, especially ECOWAS, right? And what is playing out in the Francophone countries, in ECOWAS is what is our concern this morning. And I consider that Mali, Burkina Faso are being led currently by military, and then Guinea, and we're talking about Niger now. Now, the action, against Niger by ECOWAS was that also served to the other ones, because they rallied around Niger, perhaps for one or two reasons. Because if you listen to Burkina Faso and the Mali leaders, they're also making comments relating to the economy, security, resources, and what have you. And of course, the very unpalatable situation where the vast majority of citizens of those countries are wallowing in abject poverty while they have resources here and there. One would say, look, that's not enough reason, for you to take over power, through the barriers of the gun. But I recall also that in Gambia, for instance, shortly before Muhammad Buhari left office, he had to go physically to Gambia to beg a president who was defeated flatly on an election and begged him to leave the country because he refused to leave power. Which is also part of the points that Khalifa Dekwa, Professor Dekwa, has been raising, because you cannot divorce or separate the socio-economic well-being of the people from politics and governance. They go pari passu, and when one drops, the other one tends to take over. And if what has taken over is not good enough, or does not translate to humanity, translate to people living a good life, then of course something wrong happens. Can there be a holistic address to the issue of incessant coups in ECOWAS sub-region?
Definitely. I think the answer is in security sector reform. If you isolate Africa as a continent, then isolate West Africa. And I start to be corrected. I don't think there is any military government that would brag and say it did better than a civilian administration. Maybe if we go to other continents, Asia, probably South America, we can cite one or two where military intervention probably proved better than civilian government. But in Africa, I doubt, and I stand to be corrected. So to that extent, it is wrong and inappropriate for the military to claim that they are coming in to correct what, frankly, they've not been able to correct. If you pick Mali, Burkina Faso, and to an extent Guinea at the moment, if they are claiming security as the reason for their intervention, Burkina Faso is almost about 70% its territory is being contested by non-state actors at the moment. Mali, the same thing, about 50% of Malian territory is under the control of non-state actors at the moment. So how, in what guise will they claim that they intervened to improve security or to improve the economy? Now, I know it's not as simple as I've painted it. There are several other factors that may have intervened to allow for the situation that we're in. But there are a couple of things. I talked about security sector reform. I think we're not paying enough attention to that. What is the role of the security sector in supporting democratic governance? And I think that's the crux of the matter. Our international partners, they discuss this, they toy about it, but I don't think we're investing enough. In a country like Nigeria, we've made progress, especially with the immediate past service chiefs. They've discussed this. They have put forward several components of security sector reform, especially for the military, to make it amenable and supportive of our democratic culture. I think we need to advance that so that the security sector sees its place within the democratic culture, to support it and not to truncate it like we're seeing. The second point is to invest in human capital. No matter how well, all the things we've discussed, including looking at our treaties, to our sovereignty and all of that, we cannot achieve it if we do not invest in human capital. Because who is going to come and do all of these things? Today, the three major natural resources that Niger has, uranium, petroleum, and gold, if the entire international community takes itself out of Niger, what would Niger do with those three natural resources? So we need to invest in human capital, technology, so that we have the capacity to make use of these resources that we've been given. And we're not doing that enough. And of course, all of this, everything I've mentioned, ties around good governance. How do we achieve good governance? So I think that is what the conversation at both the continental, especially the multilateral bodies, and then the role of the civil society organizations. Official channels, diplomatic channels, could not achieve what an unofficial channel achieved yesterday. 2 or 3 delegations were sent and they were rebuffed by junta, but an unofficial channel went and achieved a phenomenal move that could open the channel for communications and that would help de-escalate the current situation. So that brings me back to the role of intelligence within not just the sub-region, but at the continental level. I think the Foreign Service as a whole, not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the Foreign Service as a whole, for Nigeria and then within the sub-region, I think we need to harness the potential that exists within that foreign service, including the intelligence potential. There are backdoor channels. There are individuals, even at my level. I do have my little resources. Of course, I work with data. I collate that data using intelligence. Now, I could mention 3 persons to you that I know could have been influential in this matter. So when our President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, spoke about harnessing national powers, these are the type of thing I think we should sit back and ask ourselves, are we really harnessing those national powers? It is time for us to take a step back and then recalibrate so that our approach is slightly different than what we've done over the last 16 days.
Dr. Kabir Adamu, thank you very much for the issue you have raised. Before I bring in Ambassador Usman Sarki, there is a question I have, but I think part of it you may wish to respond to later after Ambassador Sarki. When you're talking about key influencers as non-state delegates for purposes of reaching out in this kind of circumstance. Early on, one of the things I thought of, I've never said it on air, was to say, look, and this is not to denigrate the people of Niger, but we know that Niger is a smuggler's route to Nigeria. So who are the big-time smugglers? Mm-hmm. And if they are big-time smugglers, it means that they also have contacts within the Nigerian economy. So These Nigerian persons, do they then have influence over the junta or members of the military class to whom they could say, look, we say, okay, we know a few big-time smugglers, so speak to them. And this is not going to be unusual. It's not going to be unusual. Well, I'm not saying they use criminal elements. During the Second World War, the American government opted to use the mafia in the New York Harbor area. At that time, Lucky Luciano, of course, everyone knows him as the kingpin later on that founded the, what became known as the Carlo Gambino crime family amongst the big five in New York City. But back to my question, Ambassador Saki, you are smiling, of course, you spent a number of years in New York, so you know precisely what I'm talking about. But there is an issue here. We say diplomacy, negotiate. These are men who have forcefully taken over power. They are in situ. And the thing that is to say, look, we don't want the guns blazing. Step down. Bring back the old constitutional order. Many will argue that it may not be that linear. It's not that straightforward. It's almost like solving a quadratic equation, you know, one linear, one quadratic. I'm sure Kyria will know what I'm talking about.
I don't want to.
Okay. You know, it can be a bit more complicated. Yeah. Now, what will you do with those who, if in the end it fails, who attempted to overthrow the government? What do you do with them? You're going to retain them in service? And some person will look at Turkey and see what President Erdogan did with those who attempted a coup. But within the country and outside the country, wherever they were in the world, you could see Turkey still going after them. So what is the safe landing for the coup plotters themselves? And then what were the issues? There are two issues that have come up since all of this crisis began. One had to do with the fact that they said that they wanted a change of guards, of the presidential guards. So, which is the prerogative of the president, but they resisted it. So, would they still insist that the president doesn't have powers to change his guards? That's one. Secondly, it has also been reported that there were complaints by the presidential guards and parts and sections of the army that the counter-terrorism units had been overfavored by foreign military aid, more particularly from the U.S. In other words, less and less of attention was being paid to the presidential guard. How, I'm talking from I would like you to respond to this from the diplomatic point of view. Because for ordinary folks, you say, look, negotiate, step down. But there will be issues that remain to be resolved. And those issues, of course, will be internal mostly to Niger Republic. So how do we get them to navigate around these issues? Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you. There is this cliche, which sometimes can actually translate into reality and beneficial outcome. African solution to African problem. The identical issue you brought up regarding the situation in Turkey may not apply here. Our leaders are pragmatic people. They are Africans, first and foremost. They know how culturally and traditionally and in customary way to resolve issues without slapping the face of the other person, without making the other person lose face. There are many ways, if they are amenable to discussion and negotiation and settlement. The ECOWAS heads of state and government, and Nigeria in particular, can resolve this in terms of recognizing their own grievances and genuine intents, which, however, do not justify the forceful takeover of a government. I would like to remind Nigerians in particular and the rest of the world, in 1999, Dauda Malam Wanke, a colonel in Niger, actually effected a coup d'etat. And at that time, our president, Olusegun Obasanjo, also in that year came to power as a civilian elected president. He acted swiftly by using backdoor channels. And I think the person he used is still alive, active, very sharp, mentally, physically, he is still alive. He went to Niamey, discussed and presented options, including soft landing, to the colonel. And eventually, within 8 or 9 months, we obtained a diplomatic and peaceful resolution of the affair. And Dauda Wenke actually became domiciled in Abuja before he went back to his country and passed away. And that proved the way for a civilian election. I think it was Tanja, who came after him to become the president. So we have a precedent in terms of settling issues in Niger peacefully. We should recognize that. The other issue is, like you rightly pointed out, there are ramifications. One of the consequences Nigerians should see, the continued retention of this regime will lead to the incursion, infiltration, and establishment of extra-African, non-state actor forces, namely mercenaries in Niger, which will be a direct threat to Nigeria's security, Nigeria's interests, and Nigeria's peaceful endeavor to conduct democratic and civilian governments in our own country. We should realize that mercenarism has been actually repudiated by international conventions. The United Nations Convention Against Mercenaries of 1987, I think, or 89, that came into force in 2001. And we have the OAU Convention Against Mercenarism, which was adopted in 1977 and came into effect in 1985, I think. We should be mindful that under international law, recruiting, financing, training, engaging mercenaries is illegal.
Okay, sir.
And we have to
time.
look
Yes,
at that.
time is actually not our friend this time around. We appreciate your analysis of the situation, which you've done so well. The situation now is that when you have those resolutions you talked about, when it comes down to practicing it, it doesn't work. There are mercenaries all over the world. Even in Nigeria, there are mercenaries all over the world. Well, we have heard that the junta in Niamey has already announced a prime minister, to take over the place and try to bring back normalcy or return democracy to the country. That's his own approach, or their own approach, that we'll see how ECOWAS will react to that, because it's a step that they have taken. All right. And on that note, gentlemen, we have to conclude this conversation today. Of course, there's no way we can exhaust such an issue that has been endemic in the African continent, especially in this sub-Saharan Africa. Ambassador Usman Saraki, former Nigeria's permanent secretary or permanent representative to UN, we thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. Kabir Adamu, security risk and management expert. We rely on your data all the time. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Professor Shatima Khalifa Dikwa, professor of social linguistics of English, French, and Arabic at the University of Maiduguri. We'd like to thank you for your insight this morning, giving us a historical perspective. We appreciate you. Thank you. Usman Abdullahi Shehu, NTA correspondent. I was going to ask you what the governor of the state is doing for those who are feeling the impact of the situation now, but that's not for today anyways. Thank you indeed for reaching us from Maiduguri. All right, maybe we'll have some sports.
Well, I doubt if we have enough time for that. We'd like to thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Tomorrow is yet another day. Join us then, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Look after yourselves. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirian. I'll see you again tomorrow.